My brother stole my inheritance while I worked overtime, so I took his job and left him begging for forgiveness and money. I'm a 26-year-old guy who's always been the responsible one, the kid my parents leaned on when things got messy. My older brother, meanwhile, seemed to glide through life effortlessly, charming everyone, breaking a few rules, and somehow always landing on his feet. Meanwhile, I worked brutal overtime hours, juggling multiple jobs, paying bills, fixing the little disasters he left behind, and somehow still trying to maintain a shred of a social life. My parents called him Golden Child, so often I started believing their words more than my own eyes. I'd hear them praise him for showing up late to a family dinner with some grand excuse while my 12-hour workdays never earned a single compliment. It was exhausting, and yet I craved their approval, silently hoping my loyalty and effort would finally be noticed. Every paycheck I saved was deliberate. Every extra hour at work felt like an investment, not just in my future, but in the promise my grandfather had made years ago. He'd whispered to me when I was 16 that one day, a portion of the family property would be mine. I planned around it quietly, mapping out how I'd finally have the freedom I'd worked so hard for. Meanwhile, my brother treated the same home and same family as his personal playground. Never punished, never questioned. I could feel resentment building inside me, small at first, like a knot tightening around my chest every time my parents smiled at him while I quietly handled the chaos. I'd often lie awake at night, thinking about how unfair it all was. The smell of burnt coffee from the kitchen, the hum of the heater in the background, my father's muffled laughter in the living room. It all became part of a suffocating routine. I wanted to yell, to finally make someone notice, but I held my tongue. I was the backbone of the family, invisible yet indispensable. And I knew, deep down, that the real challenge, the one that would define me, was still waiting, quietly, just around the corner, ready to test every ounce of patience and resilience I had left. The inheritance. That word carried more weight in my life than anything else. My grandfather had promised me a portion of the family property when I was 16, a quiet assurance whispered during a summer afternoon on the porch. I had held on to that promise like a lifeline, meticulously planning every move around it, imagining a life where I could finally step out from under my brother's shadow. Meanwhile, he continued coasting, charming my parents with his effortless humor and casually dismissing anything that required responsibility. My parents, always eager to praise him, would subtly hint that he might need it more, making me question myself even as I built my entire adult life on that promise. Every interaction at home started to sting in ways I hadn't noticed before. When I paid the water bill late one month because I'd been stuck at work, my father sighed, shaking his head. My brother spilled coffee on the rug and laughed it off. My mother rushed to clean it herself, praising him for being considerate. Those little slights started to pile up, invisible yet suffocating, until I realized my frustration was no longer just internal. It was shaping how I saw my family. I began writing budgets in secret, making notes about savings and investments, tracking every detail, knowing I'd need it when the time came. I thought about confronting them, about saying something, but I held back, afraid of appearing ungrateful or resentful. So I swallowed it, keeping my resentment hidden beneath a mask of compliance. The weight of unrecognized effort and unfair praise became a dull ache in my chest, a constant reminder that nothing was truly fair in my family. And then, one evening, I overheard my brother on the phone, joking about the inheritance that's practically his already. My stomach dropped, a cold knot forming in my gut, because for the first time, I realized this wasn't just favoritism anymore. This was active betrayal. And in that moment, Everything I thought I could trust started to crumble. By the time I was 22, the unfairness of my family had become a constant hum in my life, like a fridge running in the background that I could never switch off. I worked 60-hour weeks, sometimes more, juggling multiple jobs just to keep the bills paid and the household running while my brother treated our home like a hotel. I'd fix the broken appliances he ignored, cover his mistakes at work when he forgot, and still arrive home exhausted, stomach growling, only to hear my parents sigh or offer some half-hearted thanks that never quite landed. Meanwhile, he got celebrated for showing up late with a casual smile, for charming a neighbor, for simply existing in their eyes. Each small injustice added up, slowly turning into a deep, simmering resentment that I could no longer ignore. It wasn't just about the money or the inheritance anymore. It was about recognition, respect, the idea that my existence mattered. I tried speaking up once, subtly, about fairness or effort, and was met with, "You're too serious," or "He's just more natural at life." Those words burned more than any insult could, because I knew they weren't true. I had earned every ounce of skill, every sacrifice I made, but no one cared to notice. My friends would sometimes ask if I resented him, and I'd brush it off, forcing a laugh, telling myself I was better than that. Deep down, though, the knot in my chest kept tightening, a constant pressure reminding me that nothing about my family's treatment was accidental. The worst part wasn't even him. It was my parents, the people I had trusted to guide me and protect me. Their subtle favoritism, their constant comparisons, their blind eyes to my labor. It was a betrayal far more corrosive than any petty sibling trick. I remember sitting in the quiet of my apartment one night, the smell of instant noodles filling the air, fluorescent lights buzzing overhead, and thinking, I'm tired of being invisible, tired of being the scapegoat of my own family. I clenched my fists so hard my nails dug into my palms, a quiet vow forming in my mind. I would not let this continue forever. But I had no idea how deep the betrayal would go, or how far I would have to go to take what was rightfully mine. By the time I was 22, the unfairness of my family had become a constant hum in my life, like a fridge running in the background that I could never switch off. I worked 60-hour weeks, sometimes more, juggling multiple jobs just to keep the bills paid and the household running, while my brother treated our home like a hotel. I'd fix the broken appliances he ignored, cover his mistakes at work when he forgot, and still arrive home exhausted, stomach growling, only to hear my parents sigh or offer some half-hearted thanks that never quite landed. Meanwhile, he got celebrated for showing up late with a casual smile, for charming a neighbor, for simply existing in their eyes. Each small injustice added up, slowly turning into a deep, simmering resentment that I could no longer ignore. It wasn't just about the money or the inheritance anymore. It was about recognition, respect, the idea that my existence mattered. I tried speaking up once, subtly, about fairness or effort, and was met with, "You're too serious," or "He's just more natural at life." Those words burned more than any insult could, because I knew they weren't true. I had earned every ounce of skill, every sacrifice I made, but no one cared to notice. My friends would sometimes ask if I resented him, and I'd brush it off, forcing a laugh, telling myself I was better than that. Deep down, though, the knot in my chest kept tightening, a constant pressure reminding me that nothing about my family's treatment was accidental. The worst part wasn't even him. It was my parents, the people I had trusted to guide me and protect me. Their subtle favoritism, their constant comparisons, their blind eyes to my labor. It was a betrayal far more corrosive than any petty sibling trick. I remember sitting in the quiet of my apartment one night, the smell of instant noodles filling the air, fluorescent lights buzzing overhead and thinking, I'm tired of being invisible, tired of being the scapegoat of my own family. I clenched my fists so hard my nails dug into my palms, a quiet vow forming in my mind. I would not let this continue forever. But I had no idea how deep the betrayal would go, or how far I would have to go to take what was rightfully mine. I tried reasoning with my parents next, hoping logic or family loyalty would prevail, but it was like speaking into a void. You've always been responsible, my father said, avoiding my eyes, but sometimes life isn't fair. Maybe he just needs it more. My mother nodded silently, her lips pressed tight, as if even acknowledging my anger was too dangerous. I felt my stomach knot with frustration. Every word, every glance, reinforced the fact that my family had chosen my brother over me, not just once, but repeatedly. Then I tried to confront my brother again. You're not entitled to everything. Grandpa promised me my share, I said, trying to keep my voice calm. He laughed, casual and arrogant, like I was some whining child. Entitled? Please? Don't act like you've earned anything. You work hard, sure, but this is family. You should know how things work by now. My fists clenched. I wanted to hit him, to shake him, to make him feel just a fraction of the betrayal and humiliation that had been piling up for years. Instead, I walked away, swallowing the urge to scream. Days turned into nights of restless planning. I spent hours reviewing documents, tracking every opportunity, trying to figure out a way to reclaim what was mine. My friends noticed the change, the tightness in my shoulders, the dark circles under my eyes, but I couldn't explain it. How do you tell people that the people who are supposed to protect you, the ones who raised you, are actively working against you? The quiet ache of betrayal settled deeper each day, turning into a simmering rage that I could no longer ignore. One night, I overheard him bragging on the phone to a friend, unaware that I was in the hallway. She'll never figure it out, he said, laughter dripping with arrogance. My chest tightened. I realized then that this wasn't just favoritism or oversight. It was calculated. And the thought settled in my mind like a spark to dry kindling. I couldn't rely on anyone. If I wanted justice, I'd have to take it into my own hands, but I still had no idea how. Then, one evening, I stumbled onto something that changed everything. I had been quietly asking around at work, trying to understand my brother's career path, and that's when I learned the truth. He was terrible at his job. Not could improve, terrible, blatantly incompetent. Projects were slipping through his fingers, clients were frustrated, and management was quietly losing patience. My stomach tightened, a mix of disbelief and sudden hope washing over me. For the first time in years, I realized I held an advantage. I remember sitting in my apartment, the hum of the fluorescent lights above, buzzing almost like a heartbeat in my chest. The smell of old takeout lingered in the kitchen, and I could feel my fingers trembling as I imagined the possibilities. I could step in, quietly outshine him, and let the system do what it always does, reward competence. The thought felt electric, almost dangerous. For years I had been invisible, overlooked, and dismissed. But now, finally, the scales could tip. That night, I started planning meticulously. I made a list of every weakness, every misstep he had made at work, every opportunity where I could shine. I studied his reports, memorized his contacts, learned the ins and outs of his projects. It was like preparing for a battle I had been unknowingly training for all my life. The spark of anger that had burned in my chest for years now turned into cold, calculated determination. And yet, I couldn't shake a flicker of fear. If I moved too quickly, if I slipped even once, I could ruin everything. But the thought of staying invisible, of letting him continue stealing from me, was unbearable. I clenched my fists, a grim smile forming on my lips, and whispered to myself, "This ends soon. I'm not powerless anymore." I just didn't yet know how devastating the next few months would be, for him, for me, and for the family who thought they could get away with it. I threw myself into preparation like my life depended on it, because, in a way, it did. Every spare moment outside my grueling shifts, I spent studying his work, learning the processes he'd neglected, memorizing names, numbers, deadlines, even the little quirks of his clients. I stayed late at the office, asking questions under the guise of curiosity, quietly proving my competence while he remained oblivious, smug in his ignorance. At home, I double-checked every personal document, reviewed financials, and rehearsed conversations in my head, imagining the exact words I would use when the time came. It felt almost surreal, balancing the careful calm I presented to the world with the simmering storm of rage and anticipation inside me. I remember one evening, sitting in my dimly lit living room, the hum of the heater loud against the silence, pen in hand as I mapped out every scenario. I had to be perfect. One misstep could ruin everything. Friends would check in, joking about how stressed I looked, but I smiled and said, "I'm fine, just busy." No one knew how much of myself I was pouring into this plan, how much of my anger and heartbreak I was channeling into cold, strategic calculation. Every document, every email, every phone call I studied was a step closer to the justice I'd been denied for so long. Even the thought of facing him directly didn't scare me now. I knew I had the skills, the patience, and the advantage he lacked. The once invisible responsible brother was transforming into someone he could never underestimate. The thrill of control coursed through me, but I kept it buried beneath calm, almost polite expressions at home. Yet, as I lay in bed late that night, the apartment quiet except for the distant hum of traffic outside, I felt a shadow of doubt creep in. What if he noticed my plan? What if everything blew up in my face? I shook my head, forcing the fear down. No, he had stolen from me, undermined me, humiliated me. This was my chance to even the scales. I just didn't know how sharply the scales would tip, or how satisfying it would feel. Just as I felt ready to act, everything came crashing down. My brother somehow discovered that I'd been studying his work, preparing for what I thought was a secret. One afternoon, I walked into the office to find him leaning smugly against my desk, smirking like he'd caught a thief red-handed. "Planning to steal my spotlight, huh?" he sneered, voice dripping with arrogance. My chest tightened. The humiliation hit me like a freight train. Everyone around us paused, sensing the tension, and I felt exposed, vulnerable, and small. The very thing I had fought so hard to escape. He laughed, loudly, and the sound echoed in the office like nails on a chalkboard. "You really think you can do my job better than me? Everyone knows I'm the favorite. You'll always be the responsible one, the boring one." His words cut deeper than I expected. It wasn't just mockery. It was a declaration that he still controlled the narrative, still held the power I had been desperate to claim. I wanted to lash out, to throw my fist, to scream and tear his smug grin off, but I froze. That night, I went home with the bitter taste of defeat lingering in my mouth. The apartment felt smaller, darker. The hum of the fridge sounded like it was mocking me. I sat on the worn couch, rubbing my temples, staring blankly at the peeling wallpaper. I could feel the years of frustration, resentment, and exhaustion weighing on me, each memory of unrecognized effort pressing down like a physical force. For the first time in months, I felt powerless. I knew the plan had to be paused, rethought, but the thought of giving up entirely felt impossible. I clenched my fists, feeling my nails dig into my palms, the sting grounding me in the moment. I whispered to myself, voice barely audible. This isn't over. Not by a long shot. And in that silence, the fire that had driven me for years reignited, hotter and sharper than before, ready to burn everything he had built on arrogance and theft. After that night, I realized subtlety was my weapon. I returned to work the next day like nothing had happened, calm, collected, and almost invisible. But every move I made was calculated. I began taking over small tasks my brother neglected, quietly fixing errors he had left behind, anticipating deadlines he had already forgotten. Clients noticed the difference immediately. Emails that should have been lost in his chaos arrived on time. Projects that had been on the verge of disaster suddenly ran smoothly. The whispers started, colleagues commenting on my diligence, supervisors noticing the improvements. My brother, oblivious to the storm building under his nose, kept boasting about his supposed genius, unaware that the cracks he'd ignored were widening around him. I made sure every mistake he'd made was documented, carefully gathering proof of incompetence without confrontation, letting his arrogance work against him. Each day, he looked more rattled, glancing at me with a mix of suspicion and disbelief. But, never realizing the extent of the trap I'd set, I felt a thrill, the first real taste of control I had ever experienced in my life. Even at home, I maintained the facade of normalcy, smiling, nodding, helping with chores, all while silently counting the days until the plan would reach its tipping point. I reveled in the irony. He had humiliated me, tried to block my inheritance, and now, unknowingly, I was slowly dismantling the very life he thought he had won. The sense of justice coursing through me was almost intoxicating, and yet I couldn't let my guard down for a second. One slip, one premature move, and it would all crumble. I leaned back in my chair, the office buzzing around me, fingers tapping lightly on the keyboard, and thought, "You've underestimated me your entire life. Not anymore." Something in his posture that afternoon, a flicker of doubt in his eyes, told me it was only a matter of time before he realized the shift. And when that moment came, I would be ready. It finally happened, the moment I had been waiting for. My brother stormed into my office, face red, hands trembling, and I knew immediately that the tide had turned. "You've gone too far," he shouted, voice cracking with desperation. I leaned back in my chair, calm, letting him vent, letting the room vibrate with the tension he had never imagined I could wield. His arrogance was gone, replaced with fear, frustration, and humiliation. The tables had turned, and he knew it. "Please, just stop," he pleaded, voice breaking. "I didn't mean for any of this. I was wrong. Please forgive me. I'll pay you back. I'll do anything." He looked like a man seeing the ground fall out beneath him, scrambling for some purchase. I could see the arrogance, the cocky smirks of years past, stripped away, leaving only the desperate shell of someone who had finally realized the consequences of their actions. I sat quietly, letting the silence stretch. The hum of the office, the faint clicking of keyboards, even the distant murmur of a printer seemed louder now. I could feel the satisfaction simmering inside me, a quiet but powerful validation of every hour I had sacrificed, every insult I had endured. I had waited, planned, and executed perfectly. The power dynamic had reversed entirely. "You've humiliated me, stolen from me, and tried to erase me from my own life," I said, voice calm but sharp, letting every word land. "You'll make this right, or this doesn't end well for you." His eyes widened, desperation mixing with guilt. I watched him, once untouchable, now completely vulnerable, and felt a rush of vindication I had dreamed of for years. And yet, even as he begged, I didn't rush to mercy. I knew he had to feel the weight of everything he had done. One wrong word, one false move, and I would make sure he fully understood what it meant to betray the person who had carried him through life. Because finally, I held the reins, and I wasn't letting go. The next weeks were a blur of quiet, deliberate action. I made sure my brother faced real consequences for his arrogance and incompetence. At work, projects he had neglected were now under my control, and management began noticing the shift. Reports, client meetings, deadlines, all flawlessly executed. Slowly, word spread. The once golden brother was failing, and the responsible one was finally recognized. I had waited years for this, and the satisfaction coursing through me was almost electric. At home, I began asserting boundaries too. I reviewed the financials and reclaimed what was rightfully mine from his reckless spending. I approached my parents, calmly presenting the evidence of my labor, planning, and his failures. They couldn't deny the truth. The reality of my brother's manipulation was undeniable. For the first time, their tone shifted. They had no choice but to acknowledge my efforts, my responsibility, and the respect I had always deserved. It was subtle, almost imperceptible, but it mattered. I didn't stop there. I made sure he was accountable publicly as well. A few carefully placed reports, combined with client feedback, exposed his repeated mistakes without me having to say a word. Humiliation wasn't the goal, it was justice. And seeing him try to recover, flounder, and beg quietly while I calmly executed my duties brought a sense of balance to years of inequality. Even friends noticed the change. Where I had been invisible, now people sought my advice, respected my judgment, and recognized my skill. My brother, once the center of attention, was now sidelined, humbled, and finally aware of the cost of underestimating me. I leaned back in my chair one evening, the hum of the office filling the room, and allowed myself a deep, steady breath. Years of frustration, resentment, and quiet rage were finally met with tangible justice. I had worked overtime, sacrificed, and endured humiliation, and now the scales were balanced, not just in my favor, but in a way that finally affirmed my worth. And for the first time in a long time, I felt like I had truly reclaimed my life. Looking back, I can hardly recognize the person I was before all of this. Years of carrying responsibility, of being invisible while my brother was praised for doing nothing, shaped me. But they didn't define me. Reclaiming what was mine wasn't just about money or recognition. It was about proving to myself that I could rise above betrayal, manipulation, and favoritism. I learned that patience, planning, and quiet perseverance can be more powerful than anger or rash action. The satisfaction I feel now isn't just revenge. It's validation, self-respect, and freedom. My relationship with my family has changed irrevocably. My parents finally see me for who I am, not just the responsible one who cleans up after everyone else. They acknowledge my achievements and, for the first time, express genuine pride. My brother, he's humbled, quiet, and forced to confront the consequences of his choices. He no longer holds power over me, or anyone else, because the lesson of accountability has finally landed. I also feel a sense of peace I didn't think was possible during those years of simmering resentment. The fire that drove me toward revenge has cooled into confidence, into clarity. I've built boundaries, regained control over my life, and even started making plans that have nothing to do with him or the family politics I endured for so long. I can finally pursue my own dreams without the weight of their favoritism dragging me down. Sometimes I think about that younger version of me, the one exhausted, overlooked, and invisible. I wish I could tell him that it would get better, that patience and strategy would pay off in ways he couldn't yet imagine. I wish I could tell him he wasn't powerless, just unrecognized, and that one day, the the scales would tip in his favor. Sitting here now, I finally feel whole. The betrayal, the long nights, the humiliation, it all led me to a place of empowerment I had never dared to hope for. And for the first time in my life, I'm not just the responsible one. I'm the one in control, the one who defines my own destiny, and the one who finally feels free.